What's up YouTube? Welcome to the channel. This is going to be a review on the Grizzly 2x42 inch knife making belt sander grinder. So here's the sitch. I've had this thing for nearly a year now. I've made a lot of knives on this. This was my first real belt grinder. Before I had this, I was just using an angle grinder and a Dremel. I'm going to be talking about what I like about it, what I don't like, how it works in stock form, as well as some of the modifications that I've done to make it suit my needs a little bit better. The long and short of it is, if there's somebody out there who wants to get into making knives, but doesn't want to drop a couple grand on a 2x72, I would recommend this grinder. That being said, if you want to make good knives, there are a couple of simple mods that I'd recommend doing. It's nothing too hard. I'll show you all that in detail. So obviously this thing's made by Grizzly. Here are the specifications, at least that you can read. I got a little careless with my small wheel attachment here and ended up cutting some grooves into this plate. I'll show you the small wheel in just a second. This is the newer model with the 1 horsepower motor. I know that with the 3/4 horsepower one, issues with the motor were a lot more common. I haven't heard of a lot of issues being had with this 1 horsepower motor, and I'll talk about my thoughts on the motor later in the video. So this thing retails, or I got it for somewhere around $430, I believe. Had it shipped to me. I didn't have any issues with the shipping or the grinder. You know, it worked fine out of the box, no issues there. All right, so in the box, you're gonna get the grinder itself, which I believe comes fully assembled. You're gonna get this little work table here, which is just this small silver portion. I've screwed a piece of mild steel to it to give me some more space. You're also gonna get a 2x42 inch zirconia belt from Grizzly, which is a decent belt. This thing can run 2x48 inch belts too, which I'll show you what that looks like in a bit. Also, when it comes to you, it's gonna have 3 of these guards over the idler wheels and the tracking wheel. The ones that are on the top and the bottom of the platen, they can be unbolted. And then the one up here on the tracking wheel, if you want to remove it, you're going to have to cut it off, as I have done. When you are changing belts frequently, I think you'll find that it's worth it to take those off. Actually, the one that was up here on the tracking wheel, I left it on for quite a while. It didn't really get in my way too much. I only ended up removing it because I got these Scotch-Brite belts, which are significantly thicker than a standard belt, and they wouldn't quite fit between the wheel and the guard on there. This thing has a VFD, which works well. You can adjust the speed anywhere. It works well at slow speeds all the way up to very fast. I never run it as fast as it can go. The motor's back here. I'll show you the label real quick. The power cable coming out of the VFD is about 6 feet long. The chassis of the grinder is all made of this probably 1/4 inch steel, and it's on these little rubber isolators, which I'm sure you can remove if you wanted to bolt this thing down. I've just left these on here. The VFD is on this little green bracket, which is screwed to this bottom plate here. I think you do have to put this on when you get the grinder, but that's no biggie. On the chassis, as you can see, there are these slits, which I believe is meant to be like storage for the table. So you'd probably want to put this in through the back so it's not in your way, but an extra place to keep attachments. I don't use those. All the adjustment on the grinder is done with these little plastic handles. These loosen and tighten just as you would expect. Also, you can pull them out and move them around so that you can have it in a certain position, which you're going to need to move these around, as sometimes the handles can get in each other's way. So being able to swivel them around to whatever point you need and then loosen it and tighten it, that's a nice feature. if you loosen this handle right here, you can then tilt the grinder 90 degrees onto its side, which is a feature that I really don't end up using very much, but I would say it's nice to have. Just me personally, I don't end up using it, but it's a nice selling point. Then you have these two handles here, which loosen the attachments. The top one is going to be mostly for the platen assembly. These are just like 1 by 1/4 inch steel bars that connect the attachments. This bottom hole is for the work table. And now, of course, if you made your own attachments for this grinder, all you would need is a bar that's going to fit in there and then be tightened down by these handles. Then in the back, we have the motor and the drive wheel. One thing that I have noticed just recently is this plastic cover on the end of the motor has actually cracked a little bit right there, so it wiggles. I have no idea how that happened. It doesn't affect the use of the grinder at all, just something I wanted to note. Then above that, we have the belt tensioner and tracking assembly. This is actually a nice little assembly. I haven't had any problems with it for the most part. The tension is provided by this gas strut here, and you've got this handle which you'll push down on to change your belts. And then this is the tracking knob. So there's a little wing nut here that locks the tracking position in place. To adjust the tracking, you'll just loosen that. And then this threaded rod goes through and provides a stopping point for this wheel, so you can loosen it and tighten it to adjust the tracking. I'm going to put a belt on here real quick to show you how that works. So here we go with a belt. To turn it on, you'll just hit the power switch. It'll flash PO, which I'm not sure what that means, but when it looks like this, that's when you're ready. I'm going to run it pretty fast to show you the tracking, because the faster it's moving, the more responsive the tracking wheel is going to be. You'll turn the wheel away from you to make the belt go to the right, and you'll turn the wheel towards you to make the belt go to the left. When you got it where you want it, just lock that wing nut into place. Also up here on the tracking assembly, you've got this other bolt that goes through and acts as a stop essentially. So you can only bring this out so far before it is resting on that stop screw, as you can see. So you might have to adjust that to get the range of tracking that you want. And that is pretty much it for the tracking assembly. I'm going to move forward and talk about the platen a little bit. So when you purchase this thing, you're going to have this green bracket, which is just a piece of quite thin steel. It's bent at 90 degrees, and that is the grinding surface. You're also going to get a little graphite sticker pad that is about 2 inches by, I don't know, 5.5 inches, the same size as the platen, and that sticks onto that green bracket. That graphite stuff looks just like this. I bought a replacement roll of it. This isn't exactly the same. I got this from Amazon, but it's basically the same thing. It's just like a fabric backing with this graphite stuff on the front. Now this is going to reduce the friction. It actually makes the grinder run really nice and smooth and prevents the buildup of heat. The only downside to this, one, it is a consumable item, so you're going to have to replace that pad. It gets worn down pretty quickly. But also, this stuff has a good amount of give to it, so it's like a pad. It's squishy, and that squish behind the belt is going to prevent you from getting really clean grind lines, unfortunately. So most people are going to probably want to replace the platen. Another thing about the platen when you get it is that green bracket back there is actually wider than the belt. It sticks out a little bit on each side. And that's a little bit of a problem for knife making, specifically because one thing that's quite important when grinding different parts of a knife is the ability to have your belt, the edge of your belt, right on the edge of the platen or the grinding surface. And you can only adjust the tracking left and right so much. You only have a little bit of adjustment there. So you're not going to be able to move the belt so far over that it's at the edge of that platen surface. Plus, the edge of it on this side, you just have an edge, but on this side, you're going to have that curve where that bracket bends 90 degrees. So you're not going to have a hard edge there anyways. Now that I'm talking about all this, I'll just get into my platen modifications. So I'll take that belt off and show you my replacement platen. This is just a piece of, I believe, 3/16 mild steel that I've cut to shape and then drilled and countersunk a couple of holes for these machine screws. I also have the top and bottom corners slightly rounded off to reduce the friction. Another thing I did is I flattened this thing with a piece of sandpaper on my surface plate to get it absolutely as flat as I could. This piece of mild steel is also going to be an item you'd have to replace or refinish every so often. You'll also notice a significant increase in friction when you switch to a mild steel platen as compared to that graphite pad. But it is going to be worth it to have a hard, flat surface to grind on. When you have that squish, it's going to round over your grind lines and just make it harder to get even, crisp bevels on a knife. So this piece of mild steel that I've cut out, this gives me hard corners on both sides to grind on. Also, this green bracket is screwed into this mount here with a screw there and a screw there. When you get it, this green bracket is just completely flush against here. What I've done is put a couple of washers in between there to space it out a little bit. As you can see, this gap here wouldn't exist when you buy the grinder. This is just screwed directly into here, but I've got those washers in there. That moves the entire platen out slightly. That helps with the tracking. That allows me to have the edge of my platen to be in line with the edge of the wheel or maybe just to the right. And that lets me adjust the tracking to where I can get the belt right on the corner of my platen or just a little bit to the left without hitting anything. If you don't have that gap there with the washers and you're adjusting your tracking to try to move the belt to the left to be flush with this edge, you're going to find that the belt starts to hit there. It might start to rub down here. So you've got to put some kind of spacer in there. Also, once you do that, because this green bracket's a little bit too wide, that's going to cause it to stick out a lot on this side. So I've actually cut off a little sliver off of that green bracket here. So basically, to sum all of that up, put a couple washers behind the green bracket to move it over this way, screw a piece of mild steel down that's 2 inches wide, and then cut off the remainder of that green bracket that sticks out over here. Just cut that off so it's flush. Another thing you have to be mindful of is how far your platen sticks out in front of the idler wheels. So you've got a wheel on top and you've got a wheel on bottom. And you need to have this platen stuck out just a little bit past that wheel there. Let me grab a level and put it right flat against the platen so you can see there's a small gap there, and there's also a small gap right there. You need to have this stuck out slightly so the belt is pressed nice and flat against that, but you can't have it stuck out too far without just unnecessarily adding friction to this. Now the holes in this green bracket where it bolts onto this swivel mount, those holes are slightly oblong. So Grizzly does give you a little bit of adjustment forward and back from the factory. However, because I added this thickness of the mild steel on here, I had to move my platen back farther, so I had to grind away a little bit at the bracket. I just took a carbide burr and my Dremel tool and made that hole a little bit bigger. When I first added this platen mod, it creates a lot of heat on this mild steel here. You can use tempered glass or something to reduce the heat build up if you want to go crazy. But when I first put this on here, after a lot of grinding, it would actually get so hot that I was worried about that heat soaking up into the bearings of these wheels and making them wear out faster. It was getting really hot. So I needed some kind of solution. Some people have water-cooled platens, and I wasn't going to go through all that trouble, but it gave me the idea of screwing a little heat sink on the back of this. What I decided to do is buy an aluminum heat sink off of Amazon that would fit in here. Because when the grinder's running, the movement of the belt creates a decent amount of airflow around this whole area. So I thought a heat sink would be just effective enough to make it worth doing, and I think it does help. I first sanded the green paint off of this bracket here. So as you can see, the back of this is sanded down almost to bare metal, and the front is as well. And then I just squeezed a layer of thermal paste in between the platen and the bracket, and I also squeezed a layer of thermal paste in between the bracket and the heatsink. And the heatsink is held on with those 2 machine screws. I've just Dremeled out a couple of these fins, enough to where I could get that nut in there to hold it on. And after I made this mod, I think it actually made a significant difference in how hot this platen would get. I've never seen this before, and it's probably not super effective, but I just needed a little bit of cooling action going on, and it worked. You know, it still gets hot, but not so hot that you can't touch it, which is how it would get before. And it cools down quite quickly, so I'm not worried about these wheels anymore. Another thing about the platen that I didn't mention is you can loosen this handle and tilt the whole platen assembly up and down a little bit. And I usually don't ever run this thing more than, let's see, I guess this is in RPMs. It goes up from 0 to 38 or 3800 RPMs. And I hardly ever run it faster than 20 or 2000 RPM motor speed. I did have this thing trip my breaker once or twice when I was doing some really heavy grinding. That was probably faster than 2000 RPMs, like I just said, but I kind of dialed in my system and realized that I didn't need to run it that fast. But on a 15 amp fuse, I did have it trip the breaker a couple times, and that was running it really hard and really fast. And the heat of the platen, I might be making it sound like a bigger deal than it really is. For a lot of people, they wouldn't care. It's probably not gonna damage anything to have this building up a lot of heat. I was just slightly concerned about these bearings. However, one other issue that relates to heat that is a bigger deal is the motor likes to overheat. This is, I would say, the biggest limitation of this grinder. Out of everything you see here, the thing that limits me the most is the motor. And maybe overheating is the wrong word, because I've never had an issue with this as far as it stopping or anything like that. It's always done what I need it to do. However, this motor gets freaking hot. That's something that I'm always mindful of while I'm grinding. If I'm grinding a handle or something at slower speeds, it's not really a problem. It's when I'm doing blade grinding and I'm running this thing fast for long periods of time. I'm always reaching up here and touching the motor just to see how hot it is. If it's so hot that I can't keep my hand on it for long, then I stop, just take a break and let it cool down. It's a little annoying but the earlier model motor, the 3/4 horsepower motor that these things originally had, those motors are known for overheating and dying prematurely. I sort of baby this thing, you know, because for a while it was my only grinder and I relied on it to be able to make knives. So, you know, I try to keep it clean and stuff, and I'm always checking the heat of the motor. So that is largely the grinder. Just a couple of the things I'm going to talk about, and then I'll go into more in depth into the mods that I've done. The overall chassis is a good design. I think it's rigid enough for the size of it. And this thing's not incredibly rigid, but I doubt anybody would be pushing on it hard enough to really have that make an impact. If you're pressing really hard on this while grinding, you can bog down the motor. That's another thing I should mention. I typically don't have a problem with that. I'm never pushing hard enough to really bog it down, but you'll notice it slowing down slightly when you're doing heavy bevel grinding or something like that. As far as grinding options go out of the box, you obviously have the flat platen. You can remove those 2 screws and take the platen off, and you can have a slack belt running between these 2 wheels. I will also just use the top section as a slack belt. So most of the time I'll leave this flat platen on all the time, and if I need to grind on a slack belt, I'll use this top portion here. I grind on this the bottom of these 2 wheels here. I'm pretty sure these are solid steel wheels. They're not ideal for using as a contact wheel and grinding with them, but I do occasionally. Usually when handle shaping, sanding down the tangs on the bottom of a handle, I'll use that wheel. And as you can see, I don't really use the top wheel for grinding, just the bottom one. And it's holding up well. I mean, there's not even any, I can't even feel really any texture on this when I run my finger across it. So that's nice. Okay, real quick, before I get into my other mods, I'll talk about the belt tension, and I'll show you what it looks like with a 48-inch belt. So with this grinder, you can adjust the belt tension a little bit, and that's based on how far out or how far in you have the platen set. So right now I have the platen pushed all the way in, and when it's like that, your 42-inch belts will just go right over all the wheels. While I'm pulling out on the platen, I'm going to push down on the tensioner, and I'm just going to push it down a little bit and tighten that. So now we have belt tension. And then if I want more tension, what I'll do is I'll loosen this, and I'll push this down and pull the platen out all the way. So this tension handle, that's pushed down 100% of the way. And I'm pulling the platen out, and I'll tighten it there. And there, that belt is a little bit tighter. Here I have a 48-inch belt. So when I'm putting that on, the only difference is the platen is going to be pulled out quite a bit farther. So that's what it looks like with a 48-inch belt. This bar here is still fully engaged. As you can see, with a 48-inch belt, this bar is just barely sticking out the back of here. So technically you'll have just as much engagement throughout this channel with a 48-inch belt or a 42-inch belt. With your table, there's just barely enough length to be able to get it on there with a 48-inch belt. So now let's actually talk about the work table that it comes with. It uses the same type of 1 by 1/4 inch bar that the platen uses. And this table has 2 points of adjustment on it. I've screwed a large piece of mild steel on here to make my table bigger, but the table that you get is just this small piece here. So when it's in there, as you can see, it comes out just a little bit past the platen in this direction and a little bit more in this direction. but it's a very small table. Okay, so that kind of sucks. The thing that honestly makes this table bad is these adjustment points here. You get these 2 points of adjustment, and you get an Allen key with the grinder to adjust them. This first one allows the table to swivel forward and back this way. You can tilt it forward a little bit, and then you can tilt it back as far as you'd want to go and lock it down at any angle. So you have this adjustment point. You also have this adjustment on the front. This allows the table to tilt side to side like that. And that's going to be necessary when you turn the grinder horizontal, because as you can see, when I turn it, so does the table moves with it too. So you'll loosen that screw there and then put your table down. So you've already heard me say that I don't like this mechanism. It's just really cheap. I'm not sure why Grizzly couldn't put a little bit more time into engineering this. I'm fine with the Allen key adjustments, that's fine. It's just that this thing is weak. Like when you get it into position, it's very easy to just move it with your hand. Like this side to side adjustment, it's very easy for that to slip. As you can see, I'm just moving it with my hand. And when you get it into position, you have to really crank down on these Allen keys if you want it to stay in place. It's just a terrible mechanism. And they were stupid, especially with the forward and back tilting, because this corner here will hit the bottom of the table. So when I'm trying to tilt this back, that corner is contacting the bracket there. So there's a point right at about 45 degrees where it sticks, and it's hard to get it exactly where you want it, and then you start tightening it down and it moves. It's just stupid. And I'm sure I can grind down this corner here to make that less of an issue. I just haven't bothered yet. So that's one thing with the table. The adjustment is just terrible. I tend to just get it where I need it, crank it down super tight, and just hope that it stays in place for a while. I simply drilled and countersunk a hole for these machine screws and drilled a hole through the table as well. So that's how that's held on. So this is a 3 by a 12-inch long piece, by the way. Okay, so for the mods, I've talked about my table. I've talked about the platen and removing the guards. Another thing I have for it is a small wheel attachment. This little system is an idea I've gotten from other YouTubers. So I bought this small wheel attachment off of eBay. It's the one by Dictator Grinders. You can look for the one that looks like this. It comes with this bracket and 5 different sizes of small wheel. This thing's super cheap. It's like 30 bucks. And it's very cool because it's almost like it was made for this grinder. Well, not exactly, because you do have to modify it, but let me show you. So when you first get this bracket, it's going to have a little support connector that runs from here to there, I believe, and you're going to have to cut that off. So I just chopped it there with an angle grinder and cut along here, just like that, to remove that piece. And then this entire thing, which is meant to be bolted onto an attachment arm, this is going to be your attachment arm itself. As you can see, it's ground down a little bit because this full height of the bar here, that's a little bit too tall to fit into the hole on the Grizzly. So you're just going to have to grind down the height of it, just like you see here, until it can fit into this hole. Another thing is this is a little bit thicker than 1/4 inch. If you just go ahead and stick it in there, it's going to run into this screw that's in there. So luckily you can change the positioning on this. So I'm going to just, what I'm doing is I'm pulling it out and across here. That allows me to loosen it more than I would be able to because it hits that. So I usually just loosen that like 2 or 3 turns, and that allows this to go all the way inside. Then you'll tighten this down, and that is pretty much the small wheel attachment. What's really great about it is these wheels, when you put them in here, this all lines up nicely. The tracking wheel, drive wheel, and this wheel are all in line, at least close enough to make it work. Well, these wheels, they don't stay in here. They just fall right out. So you have to be careful to make sure to hold it in until you get the belt on, because if this falls, it's probably going to mess up the bearings. I'll show you the small wheel attachment running and how the tracking works. One thing is you can't use a 48-inch belt with this setup that I have, just because this isn't able to come out far enough to use a 48-inch belt. So what I do is I put the wheel in there and then grab my belt and stand up right next to it to hold the wheel in while I'm messing with the belt over here. And I'll do the same thing by pressing down on the tensioner and pulling this out and then tightening. So there you go. So that's how the small wheel attachment works. You end up with a pretty good radius here. It's not like totally straight, you know, but you have a pretty good small radius to use. As you can see over here, this is exactly how those grooves were created. It was with the small wheel attachment because the tracking is a little bit more unpredictable with this attachment. So I'm going to run this and show you guys how the tracking works. When I'm using the small wheel attachment, I hardly ever go over a speed of 10 or 1000 RPMs because it will wear out these small wheels very quickly. So let's turn it on. The tracking is a little bit more unpredictable with this small wheel. It's like more sensitive, so you can turn it a little bit and the belt will go way over. I have my grinder set up on this little thing I made out of 2x4s just to have it raised up a few inches. And then back here, I have another piece of wood that's screwed in there, and this acts as a good place for me to attach this light to. I couldn't really think of a good place to attach it on the grinder, so I ended up just building this thing, and I have this light plugged in. This is a good light, by the way. It's from Amazon, and it's very flexible, but it's strong, so you can just position it right over your grinding area and gives off a good amount of light. And these 2x4s extend back into my backstop so that when I'm pushing on the grinder, it's not going to go anywhere. And I think with that, I've covered everything pretty thoroughly, so I'm going to wrap up the review here. Let's just touch real quick on the reason why I would recommend this grinder, despite all of its flaws. The reason why I'd recommend it is because there's kind of a hole in the belt grinder market in between a 1x30 and a 2x72. In the mid-range grinder market for belt grinders that have a VFD, this is pretty much the only option. I know Vevor makes a 1x30 with a VFD, which looks like a pretty decent little machine, but I think most people can agree that they would want a bigger belt than a 1x30. There are a couple of decent looking 2x48 belt grinders made by companies like Bucktool, but those don't have a VFD. Most people are going to want a size of belt that they can easily find replacements for. 2x42 and 2x48 are both pretty easy to find replacement belts for. So you don't have to deal with any weird sizes like 1x42. And you know, I've been able to find a decent selection of different types of belts for this machine. Obviously, I've got the Scotch-Brite belts, ceramic, different materials. You can find J-Flex. You can find, the only thing that I haven't seen yet are scalloped edge belts in this size. So other than this grinder, there really is nothing in this price range unless you jump all the way up to the cheapest 2x72, which would probably be the Vivor, and that's almost $1,000. But with the Grizzly, you're looking at under 500. A little bit of effort put into modifications, and you can have yourself a decent little knife grinder for low volume operations. Now, I'm very fortunate. It's come time for me to make a bit of an upgrade from this machine, so I was able to find myself a used 2x72 on Marketplace. You might have seen a little peek of it here and there in this video. I got the broadback, so I'm super excited about that. And I'm going to be keeping this Grizzly mainly for handle shaping and because I have still a lot of belts for it. So I'm still going to be using this thing, even though I've upgraded to something that's objectively much better. But that's going to be the end of this video. Thank you for watching it all the way through. And yeah, everyone have a good one. Peace out.